The first thing anyone noticed about the house was its perfection: the tall iron gates that gleamed under the afternoon sun, the pristine lawn, the luxury cars parked in flawless symmetry. To the world, the men who owned it all had a perfect life, millions in the bank, sprawling estate, and the power that comes from absolute control. But behind those walls, silence hid a storm. The children, young and full of energy, didn't care for wealth. They didn't listen to instructions, ignore authority, or respect rules, at least not the rules their father tried to enforce. And he, the man who commanded entire industries, found himself powerless in his own home. He had tried everything. He bought the best tutors, the most advanced toys, the most skilled nannies. Yet, no matter how much money he spent, nothing changed. Mornings became battles, where the children screamed over each other while he shouted over them. Evenings ended in frustration. His perfectly tailored suits wrinkled from constant rushing and anger. His wife had left years ago, tired of watching him fail at the one thing that money could not fix: raising children who loved him freely. He had built an empire on discipline, strategy, and control, but none of it mattered here. And then, one gray afternoon, she appeared. She was not grand, not flashy, and certainly not someone he had hired. She walked in quietly, almost hesitantly, her presence unnoticed at first. But the children noticed. Unlike the nannies who barked orders or the staff who tried to impress him with efficiency, she did something different. She knelt on the floor. She smiled. She asked the children what they wanted to do, not what she thought they should do. And for a moment, the house fell silent. He watched from the doorway, arms crossed, heart racing with something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity mixed with fear. He didn't understand why this stranger had such an effect. The children approached her slowly, their suspicion melting into interest. She didn't force them. She didn't bribe them. She simply listened. And when she spoke, it wasn't a command, it was a conversation. "What made you happy today?" she asked, and the children laughed at the question, sharing small stories with a freedom he had never seen at home. The man felt a strange pang in his chest. He realized how long it had been since anyone had really listened to his children. He had tried to provide for them, to shape them with rules and structure, but he had never truly seen them. And she, this quiet stranger, was doing in hours what he had failed to do in years. He felt helpless and intrigued, angry and hopeful all at once. Could someone who wasn't his employee, who hadn't been trained, really teach him how to reach them? Hours passed, and the house shifted in subtle ways. The children moved with more laughter, less resistance. Toys were no longer thrown across the room in tantrums but shared and played with together. Even the walls seemed lighter, as if the tension that had clung to them for years had begun to loosen. He tried to step in, to assert control, to remind her that he ran this house. But she met his gaze with quiet confidence and a simple smile, saying nothing, yet saying everything. She didn't challenge him, she simply refused to allow the chaos to win. That night, as he stood alone in his office overlooking the estate, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Not the house, not the children, but him. For the first time, he questioned his own methods, his own understanding of power and control. He had wealth, influence, and prestige, yet he realized he had been blind to the most important lesson of all: love cannot be bought. And deep down, he knew that this stranger, this woman who had walked into his life, might just be the key to saving not only his children but himself. The next morning, the house felt different. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a living room that was no longer dominated by chaos but filled with soft laughter and curiosity. The man, still in disbelief, watched from the doorway as the children played, a sense of wonder, and a flicker of unease, rising in his chest. He had never seen them like this: no shouting, no running wild, just simple moments of joy. And at the center of it all was her, the quiet woman who had entered their lives only a day ago. She moved with grace, her patience steady, her voice calm, guiding the children without ever raising it. He tried to convince himself that this was temporary. Maybe she was just lucky, he thought, or maybe the children were tired of rebellion. Yet, every time he observed her interactions, a subtle warmth spread through him, a warmth he hadn't felt since the children were born. He remembered the nights he spent alone in his office, watching them sleep from a distance, wishing he knew how to connect. Now, he was watching, and for the first time, he felt hope instead of despair. But change never comes without resistance. By mid-morning, the children began to test boundaries again, their natural stubbornness surfacing like small waves against a calm sea. They refused to finish their breakfast, arguing over toys, raising their voices. The man felt the old tension bubbling inside him, the urge to shout, to demand, to regain control. He took a deep breath, ready to step in, but she was faster. She knelt beside the children, her expression gentle yet firm. "I see you're upset," she said softly, "but yelling won't solve it. Can we find a better way together?" The words were simple, but they carried a power he could not explain. The children paused, confusion flickering across their faces. No one had ever spoken to them like that before. No one had ever acknowledged their feelings without judgment. Slowly, their voices quieted, and they listened. They began to negotiate with her, sharing toys, taking turns, even laughing at silly mistakes. And the men, who had spent years trying to enforce order, realized something astonishing: authority did not come from power, it came from understanding. By afternoon, the house felt alive in a way he had never experienced. He watched as she read stories, encouraged creativity, and guided the children through small chores, not with anger, but with encouragement. They obeyed, not out of fear, but out of trust. And with every moment, his heart ached with both regret and relief. Regret for the years he had spent trying to dominate instead of connect, and relief that someone had finally shown him the path he had been too proud to see. That evening, as the children ran off to play outside, she turned to him with a quiet smile. "They just need someone who listens," she said, almost as if reading his thoughts. He nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. He had been a leader in the boardroom, a man who commanded respect and results, but here, in his own home, he had failed. And yet, in the same breath, he realized he could learn. He could change. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope, not for success, not for power, but for connection. The night brought a new challenge. A sudden fight broke out between the children over a small toy, escalating faster than he could intervene. His old instincts screamed at him to take control, to raise his voice, to enforce rules. He stepped forward, but she stopped him, her hand on his arm, her eyes calm and steady. "Let me," she said softly. He hesitated, heart pounding. For the first time in years, he surrendered, not to her, but to a method he had never believed in: patience. Minutes passed like hours. The children's anger melted into tears, then apologies, then laughter. And he, who had always feared losing control, realized he had witnessed something far more powerful: trust, connection, and respect. She turned to him once more, smiling, and in that moment, he understood the truth he had resisted for so long: this woman had not just entered their home, she had entered their hearts. And their lives would never be the same again. The next morning, the house felt almost surreal. The children woke up smiling, talking animatedly about the plans for the day. The men watched silently from the doorway, a strange mix of pride and disbelief washing over him. Just a few days ago, the house had been a battlefield, yelling, chaos, and frustration every hour of the day. And now? Laughter echoed from the walls, voices mingling in playful conversation rather than conflict. He knew it was her doing, yet he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that he had been absent from this part of their lives for far too long. He tried to remind himself to stay patient, to let her lead, but the old habits died hard. He noticed the small signs of rebellion in the children: a defiant glance, a stubborn refusal, and he felt the urge to assert control rising in his chest. Before he could speak, she placed a gentle hand on his arm and shook her head slightly. Her eyes met his, calm and unwavering, and in that silent exchange, he realized he had to trust her judgment. For the first time, he let go of the need to dominate. By midday, the men had begun to understand the magic of her approach. She didn't use punishment, she used empathy. She didn't demand obedience, she offered guidance. And the children responded, not out of fear, but out of connection. They shared their thoughts, their dreams, their fears, and he watched in awe as she listened to every word, validating their feelings with patience and care. The men had spent years teaching strategy, discipline, and efficiency, but this emotional intelligence, was a lesson he had never learned. But life rarely gives change without a challenge. That afternoon, an unexpected crisis struck. One of the children fell while running across the polished floor, crying out in pain. The man's instincts kicked in immediately. He lunged toward them, panic overtaking him. She arrived first, calm and composed, kneeling beside the child, checking carefully for injuries. "It's okay," she said gently, "I'm here. You're safe." The child, still trembling, clung to her, and slowly, the tears stopped. He stood frozen, realizing that his rush to control and protect had been replaced by something more powerful: reassurance through presence and understanding, the incident became a turning point. That evening, as the children laughed at dinner, recounting the day's adventures, he felt a deep shift within himself. He had been trying to parent through authority alone, and it had failed. But watching her, seeing the trust she had earned, he understood the truth: love requires patience, attention, and empathy. Wealth could buy tutors, toys, and comfort, but it could not buy connection, understanding, or genuine respect. Later, after the children were asleep, he found himself sitting in the quiet of the study, reflecting on the last few days. The house was still, but the echoes of laughter lingered in his mind. He realized how much he had missed, not just in raising his children, but in truly being part of their lives. The woman had done what he could not: she had broken down the walls of fear, resentment, and misunderstanding. And he, a man who had spent decades in control of everything else, finally understood that real strength came from listening, from patience, and from love. As he watched her organize small bedtime stories, tucking the children in with gentle words and tender care, he knew that life would never be the same. The house was no longer a place of chaos, nor a symbol of his failures. It had become a home, a sanctuary built not by wealth or power, but by the quiet strength of someone who believed in connection. And he understood, with a clarity that startled him, that the moment she had walked into their lives was the moment everything had begun to change. The man's journey as a father had just begun, and for the first time, he felt ready to walk it, guided by the lessons she had quietly taught.